You're watching Fish Plates and Scratch Builds. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm going to show you how to make some loads for your model railway wagons. Let's take a look. In my last video, I looked at some different techniques that you can apply to your wagons to weather them up and make them look a bit more work worn. But that's only half the story. Obviously, wagons on the real railway were designed to transport things, so it stands to reason that ours look like they are as well. Now, I'm a really big fan of using items that you either already have or things that you can acquire really cheaply. And as a modeler, I find loads and loads of bits and pieces that I just end up with. And you're going to see a lot of those used in these techniques today. And I think you can get some really effective results from them. Now, of course, you can go out and you can buy ready-made loads from all kinds of different sites, 3D printed ones, resin cast ones, all sorts of different types. But I think it's really fun to just sometimes have a go and make your own, because sometimes it can get quite expensive if you've got lots of wagons that you need to fill. So come with me and I'm going to show you some really interesting and effective wagon loads that you can create today on your own model railway. One of the simplest loads to replicate is any kind of loose material like stone, sand, or in this case, coal. Coal was extracted and shipped in various grades, from huge chunks bigger than house bricks right down to scraps that were little more than dust. If your loads are going to be permanent, you could just fill your wagon up with coal and be done with it. But not only could this prove more expensive in the long run, it could also cause the glue to take much longer to set. I prefer to create a sort of false bottom. I'm using foamboard. It's light, easy to cut and relatively cheap. This pack cost me £7 and I worked out that I could make about 45 average size wagon loads from it. Better yet, it's already black, which means I don't have to worry about any part of it showing through my coal. Measure and cut the foam to fit your chosen wagon. Aim to cut it ever so slightly smaller so it comes out with ease. I do a tip test. If it falls out without the need for shaking, it's about right. Coal wagons weren't filled right to the top, but the mounds created by the filling process could often be seen to peak over the top. To achieve this humped look, cut some smaller pieces of foam board and shape them into some rough mounds. You don't have to be too accurate here, as the coal will cover any mistakes. An easy way to make loads removable, especially during a running session, is to use magnets. Neodymium or rare earth magnets are readily available and reasonably cheap. They're also incredibly powerful. I've glued one to the top of this load and will use another to make a tool for lifting the loads out. Just be sure to get the polarities right. I've had this coal for some time, so its origins are unknown, but there are lots of different products available to buy. Or you could get hold of a lump of real coal and break it down. I'm not using real coal, but this pestle and mortar does a fine job at breaking up the larger chunks. Don't worry, it's never been used in the kitchen. One handy tip to keep the load perfectly shaped to the wagon is to use a piece of cling film coated in a thin layer of Vaseline. This helps protect the wagon and stops the glue from sticking to the plastic, allowing it to be easily peeled away once the glue has set. I sprinkle on some coal, moving it around until I'm happy with the shape. I'm using matte Mod Podge for the glue, as it tends to set clear matte, unlike some PVA. I'm using half Mod Podge, half water, so a ratio of 50-50. A small drop of washing up liquid helps to break the surface tension so the glue mixture can really get between all those lumps. A quick spray of the coal load with a mixture of water and washing up liquid also helps to break the surface tension. Use a pipette to apply the 50-50 glue drop by drop until you can see it's found its way between every chunk. Now pop the whole thing somewhere warm and dry to set. After 24 hours, it's worth removing the load from the wagon and taking off the cling film, as the plastic can stop the glue deeper down from setting fully. You may need to set it aside again to dry even further. A quick test fit and with a bit of luck, it comes out nice and easy. How about that? The magnet works as well. If you're not too bothered about having removable loads, you can skip the magnet and cling film steps and just add the foam board, coal and glue directly to the wagon itself. Due to the nature of loose material like coal, it's inevitable some would be left behind when the wagon was emptied. If you're modelling coal wagons with removable loads, why not create an alternative empty interior which is revealed when the wagon is removed? Using the smallest amount of that 50-50 glue mixture, coat the bottom of the wagon. I put that pestle and mortar to work again and created some very fine dusty coal remnants and scattered them across the wagon, aiming to concentrate them around the edges. For variety, I selectively added a few larger chunks using a drop of neat PVA. Now set that aside to completely dry. Once dry, some black weathering powder applied lightly suggests coal dust staining and helps to tie it all together. After World War II, the newly nationalised steel industry needed high-quality scrap metal. Rail was the most efficient way to move large volumes from scrapyards to steelworks. This one makes for a particularly fun project. As a modeller, I tend to keep everything because you never know what might be useful. My time has finally come. I like to keep a scrap box filled with a bunch of random pieces that have no other discernible use. It tends to include old, failed or abandoned kits, offcuts of plastic card, white metal objects, discarded plastic wheels. Any item that could pass as scrap metal, really. After selecting a wagon, I measured the base as before. This time, I made a false bottom from plastic card. In this case, keeping the majority of the items plastic will make the job of gluing much simpler. Cutting plasticard is easy. With just a few passes of a craft knife, the two pieces can be snapped for a nice neat edge. I add some legs to the base, securing it all with plastic cement. The support structure doesn't have to be as elaborate as this, just something to raise it up and keep it square. A quick test fit as before, and we're good to go. If you're making removable loads, you could also add a magnet at this stage too. Time to start adding the scrap. This is the fun part. I'm using one of these 90-degree assembly jigs from Scale Model Scenery to keep the scrap within the outline of my template. Add a little plastic cement to the surface and apply your scrap in layers. I aim to bulk out the bottom with more generic items, trying to get as much coverage as I can so the base doesn't show through. Try and do this somewhere well ventilated because the fumes from these glues are not great to inhale. The glue dries fast, so I'm able to build layers very quickly. I'm looking for interesting shapes and thinking about how the items would lay if they were simply dumped in. I make sure the top has a few recognisable items for variety. Take your time and don't be afraid to test out your placement before committing it to glue. Another alternative would be to pile the plastic scrap into your wagon and use a thin plastic cement to flood the pieces so they become one solid mass. This would probably work perfectly on most ready-to-run wagons, but I've painted the inside of mine and the cement would strip the paint. Doing things this way also allows for removal of the load and easier painting. Items made from other materials such as white metal, brass or resin could be sandwiched between the plastic parts or added later with some superglue. This laser-cut bike becomes the cherry on the top. Once fully dry, I give the whole thing a blast with some trusty Halford's primer. I've chosen red oxide as it's the closest match for the rust. When that's dried, it's onto the paint. I recently picked up these bottles of generic acrylic paint from The Range to avoid repeatedly mixing similar rusty shades. They were only £1 each and much bigger than most hobby paint. I'm using the same rusty paint process as my previous video about weathering, so check that out if you've missed it. I start with the darkest brown all over. I watered this one down a bit so it would reach through all the complicated detail more easily. As a result, I did have to let it dry before I could continue. But once dry, I then moved on to dry brushing some mid-brown across some of the more obvious exposed surfaces. And then one final lighter coat of orange rust was very sparingly dry brushed across the very top raised surfaces. It's this layering process that helps to give a greater sense of depth. Lastly, my secret weapon. I've had this little pot of enamel oily steel paint for years. It's gone all crusty and really it's only worth chucking in the bin, but I only need the smallest amount for dry brushing. Just the very lightest of passes over the top of the pile highlights the edges and suggests some areas the rust hasn't yet reached. You'll be amazed how well this works. Now that's fully dried, let's pop it in the wagon and see how it looks. I'm a big fan of reusing common items in new and interesting ways. Case in point, I often have a big supply of sleepers from offcuts of flexi track. Look around any railway and you'll always find piles of sleepers and rail in all kinds of places. Let's make a load out of these too. Now, I tend to go for Pico track these days, but that presented me with an unexpected problem. The sleepers have small holes underneath the chairs. These don't show with the rail mounted, but in this case, they look unrealistic. I could plug them with tiny bits of plastic strip, which I did consider, but quite honestly, that's going a bit too far. Purely by chance, I noticed that Hornby sleepers don't have these holes. So I gathered enough of them together to make a little pile, cutting them free from their webbing and giving the sides a quick sanding where necessary. I found an appropriate wagon and measured the inside to see how many sleepers it could hold. Then I started to glue them together in a row. I'm making one long row, but you could make these in smaller piles to suit smaller wagons. I don't know what plastic Pico use, but I can never get their sleepers to adhere with regular plastic cement. However, these Hornby ones go together very nicely. I also added a very thin piece of plastic card to the underside for added stability. Painting follows the same process as my track video. Again, if you haven't seen that, there's a link up above to watch that one next. I start with a coat of grey primer. Then a quick blast with some generic brown. In this case, it's a Revel spray can. Then a thin coating with a dark wash. A dry brushing of light grey to bring out some of those highlights and make the wood look a little bit more washed out. And then finally the chairs are picked out with a mid-brown to suggest a bit of rust. You may have to wait for each of these stages to dry before you can move on to the next one. Once complete, pop them in your wagon or by the line side and enjoy the result. Another item I have in absolute abundance are wheels. I like to replace plastic wheels on older stock with newer metal wheels, but I always keep the old wheels for some reason. Now, the pinpoint axles that we see on model wheels aren't accurate, so I'm going to fix that. I took this picture at the Kentonese Sussex Railway of some wheel sets that were sitting in the yard. On the real thing, there's a cylindrical axle which protrudes about a foot in length on either side. This is easily rectified with some very short offcuts of hollow plastic tube. About 4mm should do the trick for 00 scale. I found gently applying pressure with the blade and rolling the tube at the same time gave a quick and accurate cut without distorting the plastic. Some plastic cement on the axle points and they pop right over the ends. The only problem is the visible hole at the end of the hollow tube. I cut some small squares of plastic card, glued them over the ends, and when dry, sanded them into rounds. A bit fiddly, but it seemed to do the job. Two of my wheels seemed to be a different design. The axle pin was finer and the inner wheel profile shallower. I cut the pinpoint axle away and used a solid plastic rod instead. Once the axles had dried, it was back to the red oxide primer. Painting the wheels was a case of layering rust colours as before, going from dark to light and becoming more sparing each time. And then I added some dark wash where we would see grease and black staining on the real thing. I couldn't find many images of the kind of bracing structure that would have held the wheels to the wagon. So I made this false bottom from embossed plastic card and made a rough approximation of a wooden frame from plastic strip. I then painted it the same way I did with the sleepers. Once dried, the wheels can be glued to the frame and popped into the chosen wagon. Looks good enough to me. This permanent way wagon was created using many of the techniques covered in this video. A small pile of ballast, some spare sleepers, and the odd piece of random detailing to suggest a well-used work vehicle. It even has a false bottom for easy removal. But one of my favourites is perhaps the simplest. These wagons have been populated with a bunch of random commodities such as crates, boxes, bags, oil drums and milk churns. Just like all the techniques in this video, it's super easy to achieve and adds some visual interest to your layout. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video has inspired you to have a go yourself. That's always my aim with these videos. And don't forget that you can follow me on Instagram and also join the Fish Plates and Scratch Builds Facebook page, where I would love to see and hear all about your modelling experiences. So until then, and the next video, take care and I'll see you then.